hearing an update on the various work activities that have been taking place within the LTI project group or various subgroups, task forces that are active that might be of interest to you. So this is kind of a state of the union of what LTI has been working on, and an open question and answer. So if you have any questions related to what you hear today, what Bracken will be presenting to us, or anything related to implementing LTI, working with partners, strategies, there's resources that might be available to help you. Feel free to speak up. We want this to be interactive as well. If you prefer to just type away in the chat, there will be people who I'm sure will respond. We have a great LTI work group community that is really active and dedicated to seeing this become successful. So, and then, or just open up your mic at the Q&A time and speak up. We want this to be helpful for you and a good use of your time. So if you do have LTI related questions, this hour is for you. So go ahead, Bracken.
Hi everyone, I'm Bracken Mossbacker. I work at IMS. I'm the architect for LTI and some of the other specifications. So I work closely with the work group and others to do LTI stuff. So welcome. We decided to kind of give an overview of everything that's happening to the broader group. And I was trying to find a nice way to give all of the different projects and stuff that's happening a little bit of context. So hopefully I did that well. So I think of LTI itself, the specification, as infrastructure. If you it establishes the patterns for integrations that we can all take advantage of, pun intended. And it's, the specification itself, and, it solves some things that makes it really, but really what it is, it's a platform for many, many different types of integrations and different problems to be solved. So it's really, to me, just the base infrastructure for solving a lot of our integration and education EdTech platform problems. And so it's a lot more than just that base specification and other specifications. I kind of broke it down into a few areas of, what this infrastructure is. And I think of it as the base infrastructure and configuration. That's things like registration, the launch mechanics, actually doing the single sign-on launch from one system to another, the service mechanics, the OAuth2 infrastructure and how the service information is conveyed via launch mechanics, and then the base security and privacy implications of all of those mechanics. Being able to have secure connections, and the keys and secrets and all that, handled well at an infrastructure level. So that's really, one of the most important parts of this infrastructure is all those base pieces. And then on top of that, we have the message launches, and this is kind of traditionally seen as the LTI thing. You can move from one system to another. And in those launches, we send many things. And I kind of broke it down to intent. That's, the message type. This is intended to load an activity. This is intended to discover content. This is intended to, do a proctoring service. In those launches, we have claims, which is all the data that comes along with those launches. And they're all kind of explicitly defined what's in there, and it's very extensible. And then also substitution variables. And this is a part of the configuration of it, but this is a tool, for example, being able to say, hey, I need this data. Can you provide it to me? So it's, it's another communication mechanism to make these integrations work well together and let people convey their needs. The platform services is a very, the services, this OAuth REST infrastructure is very important. That's to me the big difference between previous LTI 1.1 and LTI Advantage is that I think we got the infrastructure for adding services right. It's really easy to define new services. It's easy to communicate about new services. And while there's always going to be complexities, and as that scales and grows, we're going to have to solve new problems. I really think we're in a really good place to be able to create and use the services that we have. And within those services, We have, specifically defined data schemas that are also extensible and customizable. And so you can see that same flexibility there. And then to me, the real success story of LTI is that all of us here and broader are a community of practice. LTI, the base spec doesn't mean anything like, as we, you can, two people can implement LTI and it can be so drastically different. It can be so differently confusing for teachers and students and designers. And so the best practices of how we learn this together and convey that to each other and learn together and grow together is really the most important feature. The certification, validation, reference invitations, those will never actually, solve the problems or help people, keep moving forward. Those are just verifying that the infrastructure works. But the real interesting thing happens at the human level, I think. There's a lot of problem solving there. This is, services grow fast, messages grow fast, integrations grow fast, and we just have to constantly be working together. And that's really, the purpose of this roundtable and, our quarterly meetings and stuff is to keep us communicating and solving these problems together. Like, hey, look, we did this UX pattern and this works really well. That's how deep linking exists now. It's like, hey, we, a vendor needed to solve a UX problem. They solved it, and then it became, over years, a generic pattern that all of us can follow. And the work group and this group, we kind of are the technical implementers community of practice, but really it's a much broader set of people. It's not just the technical groups, it's the administrators, educators, the learners, providing feedback on how well these integrations work. And if we have, if all the integration problems, but all the learners are like, this sucks and it's annoying, like, how much have we really solved? And so, our community of practice, I think, is the most important piece. And I'll emphasize that a bit throughout this. So I think of LTI as, patterns of integration are enabled by what LTI specifies. It's always going to be, we're making it possible to solve a lot of problems, and then we work together to actually figure out the best way to solve those. There's my opening treatise, I guess. So I tried to think about, on top of this infrastructure, what are the areas where we are solving problems? And I kind of thought of some nice categories that helped me understand it a little bit. I saw all these things going on and I couldn't, there were so many I didn't really understand it. So I broke it down into these categories that I will keep referencing throughout. So the problem solving areas that we're solving problems on top of the LTI infrastructure are the general configuration problems, registration, the mechanics. There's continually problems with cookies and iframes, and so there's a lot of base problems that we will always continue to be solving. User and context management. Right now, those are like the launch claims. This is the user in this course at this school. Names and roles provisioning service, being able to get the users in context. Gradebook management. Right now, that's assignments and grade services. Deep linking, because you can turn an LTI link with a line item on it. Launch claims. Moving from a platform to a tool, you can provide the information to be able to send a grade back. Content management, I think of that primarily as deep linking and its various content types, but also Common Cartridge is really integrated there because there's so many people who use Common Cartridge to import dozens and hundreds of links and a base organization for those links. And so that's really, I think, an important piece as well. And then there's others that fit into those somewhat, but like the proctoring service, trying to solve some proctoring problems. The caliper connector, connecting analytics between platforms and institutions and tools. So these are some kind of high-level areas where I want to go through and show the new work that's happening in each of these areas. So I kind of broke this down to these areas and how they align to the LTI infrastructure. And as I go, feel free to ask questions in chat and interrupt for any of these individual new work things. And people, members of the work group, when I miss points on the thing more about, feel free to hop in. I'll kind of pause at the end of each one. Feel free to add color to what I'm saying. If we need to dive into any of these and it starts to go long, I might cut it off and save it for the end. We're going to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And so if we want to dive deep into any one of these new areas of work, I may cut that off and just move it to the end, but feel free to ask questions and clarifications, because I don't actually know the details of all these pieces. I'm just trying to give an overview.
Just to clarify, there is also the course groups service, which comes under user and context management.
Oh yeah, so these are the current ones, and then all the new stuff I'm going to cover right now in those categories. I assume I have course groups here. I don't. It's on the other slide though. So this is just an overview of all the pieces I'm going to cover, and all the new work in those same categories. So this is an overview. So let's start with infrastructure and configuration. So currently, I kind of think of this as we have a manual registration process, many different experiences. We have confusion about JWKS usage for tools. And so we're doing work to clarify JWKS usage and that all tools should use it. And then the new work that's coming, we're working, there's a spec called dynamic registration. And what this is meant to solve the problems we have with manual registration and the copying and pasting of all those 5 and 6 data elements needed to configure LTI 1.3. And so I see dynamic registration as this new service as falling under these LTI categories here on the right. And the work group is super excited about dynamic registration. It's implemented in a few LMSs already. And really, this is just, again, meant to solve that basic integration problem for us and for administrators. Martin, other LMSs are still looking into it. So we're really excited about dynamic registration because it really simplifies the workflow for end users and for us to manage these things. And there's many Roundtable recordings on dynamic registration, so feel free to go watch those. And the next pieces coming on this are certification and reference implementation for those. So that's super exciting work. Another thing that's happening right now is called the data privacy message. This is led primarily by the European LTI task force. They needed to solve some specific GDPR problems, but this isn't meant to solve just that. And what it is a new message type. So that's kind of why I highlighted intent and claims here. That's the infrastructure it's using to convey information and intent about data privacy information. And this is in private draft. Martin, I forgot the state of the actual document.
Yes, I believe it is.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a private draft. You should all be able to get access to it. It's a member private draft, and it's a new message type. And then another thing in the infrastructure and configuration category is we've spun up a new task force targeted on cookies and iframes. Tools in particular know of a lot of the problems of modern browsers blocking third-party cookies within iframes, and we have a task force spun up specifically to target this because it's a core infrastructure problem that we're working on. And this task force just has only been meeting a few weeks now. We have a few goals. One of them is clear best practices and problem description of the current problems. There's lots of great workarounds now. There's lots of ways to deal with this in the browsers and how they are now. And so there's that's the short term. We want to help everyone understand the problems and how to solve them with workarounds right now. That's an important output. We want to still build some infrastructure to actually test and QA these different types of problems that we hit with cookies and iframes. And then we're also working towards a long-term solution. This is going to be ever evolving. Browsers are going to keep trying to block different areas. And we need to keep working on that. And so an important part of this task force, it will be long-term solutions there. So, so those are kind of the 3 pieces of work happening in the core infrastructure configuration category that I made up for LTI. Any questions about those ones or comments? All right, so the next category is user and context management. And I really did leave out the group service. That's sad. Okay, I can. So user and context management. I think of this primarily as names and roles, where, you know, getting rosters back and forth. But the launch claims in the actual LTI message are the simplest version of user and context management. A tool could know who the user is and so that's kind of the base infrastructure there. What the enhancements we're working on are threefold. Context launches. This has been underway for a while. This is meant for like non-specific resource launches. You're not launching to a reading or a quiz. This is like, you know, imagine your course level navigation that says load this tool, or admin level navigation, or user level or group level, those kinds of things. And this is handled, you know, all the LMSs implement this in slightly different ways and different understandings. And we're trying to figure out a way to define a launch message that has a specific intent in a different specific context, and figure out how to configure that consistently across the LMSs, so tool vendors don't have to, you know, spend so much time figuring out differently for each individual one. And so we're excited about this, and you know, I think there will be some interesting new message types coming out of this, and different support for new integration styles, or at least standardizing a bunch of ones that exist. Another thing that's happening, roles for test users. We've got a little project going to define a specific new role for test users. Having test users are surprisingly complicated for conveying the intent from a platform to a tool. And so we're trying to start small with, you know, specific use cases, but have really good best practices and intent around what we have now and what we might have in the future. So a lot of discussion going on around that. And if you've got use cases and problems around this that you would like to make sure we cover as a work group, please let us know. But that's some work that's going on as well. And then the one that Martin pointed out, I didn't have in here, there's a service called the group service. And what that is more for, you know, if the SIS holds the official course and user enrollments, but say you're in your LMS and you create a bunch of groups, those aren't going to exist in the SIS. They're not official organization groups. They're just kind of ad hoc groups. And LTI tools may need and want to take advantage of those for, you know, grouping the users into activities and stuff like that. So this is a simple service built on top of the service infrastructure that was defined between Blackboard and Turnitin. And I really love the group service because it's a great example of there's two vendors like, hey, we have a problem that needs solved. Standards don't solve it. And they went through the work to define a clear document and make it generic and usable by others, just on top of our infrastructure. And so it's like, hey, this is a specific scope of problem that needs solved. We're going to make a service that everyone can use to solve it. And I think that really shows, again, the community of practice here. You know, it's not just, you know, what LTI Advantage defines as, you know, the problems that can be solved. We can solve new ones in standard ways, in interoperable ways. And I think that's really exciting. Pausing for comments or questions. All right, so gradebook management is one of the other categories. You know, right now it's primarily covered by assignments and grade service, deep linking, and then the launch claims. And there's a lot of obviously ground that can be solved there. New incoming work here, or underutilized work, submission review. So submission review is awesome, and you all need to implement it. So what this is, say you do an LTI launch to a tool, you do an activity in there, and there's an artifact in that tool, or there's a grading interface for the teacher to go in and grade it in that tool. What submission review allows is when you're using assignment and grades and you send a score back to the LMS, for example, say, hey, here's their score, here's the status of that, and here's the LTI launch URL, essentially, where you can actually view this work. You know, and a teacher or student can, you know, the LMS could put in their gradebook interface somewhere that says, you know, the ability to click on that and hop right to that specific submission in that tool system. And then you can provide the appropriate interface, whether it's just review and looking at it, or whether it's grading and commenting system. So this has been a very, very heavily requested feature over the years. And we kind of finished the draft document last year. It kind of got pushed down in everyone's priorities due to COVID, it seems like. But it's got an LMS implementation, and I still get multiple questions for this, you know, requests for this feature monthly. So again, it's Everyone wants this, but we're still just waiting on implementations on it. So you all should implement submission review because it solves a lot of cool problems for teachers and students, which is awesome. Common Cartridge 1.4. It's not strictly LTI work, but Common Cartridge has a new version that's in draft state as well. And one of the biggest complaints about Common Cartridge and LTI was that there's no standard way in Common Cartridge to specify that an LTI link has a grade associated with it. And so in the new version of Common Cartridge, just like in deep linking and assignment grades, it uses that same line item model definition. You can have that inside your LTI links in Common Cartridge as well. And that allows you to move bulk assessments between systems that have the grade information associated with it. That will automatically integrate with assignments and grade service and the way LTI works. So I think that's really exciting. Common Cartridge is wonderful. I'm also the architect there, so I'm not biased. There's a new I put this a new thing called the activity item profile. I put this in gradebook management just because there were I wasn't using my fancy highlights. Just because there's too many things in content management, but so activity item is a proposal that is for also a very often requested feature or level of LTI integration. And I think the easiest, it's broader scope than this, and there's more details. But I think of it as, say you've got a quiz and you want to have a quiz full of many different questions that are LTI links. You know, maybe you are using a Lore with individual quiz questions, or there's, you know, a cool math activity. And so you have a quiz question where you've got some native questions to your assessment platform plus LTI ones. And, you know, how does it work when you send a grade back for an individual item that's a part of a group of items, you know, and, you know, how does assignments and grades work in that? How do all the, you know, what's all the information that's going to come across in the claims? You know, how do the endpoints work? So there's a lot of complexities there, but really what all this is bringing together a bunch of pieces that already exist to solve a problem that people have been asking for a long time, which is embedding smaller LTI activities within larger activities. And so there's a spec for this that's moving forward and some activity for that. Did I cover that one well enough, Victor, or anybody who can answer that?
Yep. I think the other notable thing to mention here that you didn't mention is that it proposes a way to handle multiple submissions. So track multiple interaction attempts at an item.
Right. And this has also sparked a lot of conversation with the QTI work group as well, and how QTI and LTI can work well together on some of the stuff. And I think that's really exciting as well. So those are kind of the items that are moving forward in the gradebook management category. Let's see. Okay, content management. Deep linking, again, I think is kind of the primary thing when I think of LTI and content management and its various content types, and then Common Cartridge. So I just put this here to emphasize extensibility. You know, deep linking defines some, you know, LTI links and an image and all these specific content types so that the semantics and syntax of those are very clear between tools and platforms. You know, we are able to define new content types to help solve specific problems where there's maybe something that's unclear with an existing one, or we have new things like activity item where we might, you know, return an activity, even though it's an, you know, there's complexities there. And so I think as deep linking grows in implementation, as more people implement it, there might be new content types that people want to define. And I think that's a great area for extensibility where we can, you know, build a practice around defining those very clearly and tools and platforms being able to communicate what they support and in what context. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there. There's nothing specific happening. I just wanted to point that out because I like extensibility. Deep linking service is a project that's moving forward right now. This has been a long-term push by some people that hasn't always gotten enough footing just because it hasn't hit the priority. But this is another very frequently requested area of base functionality, not being stuck in the user workflow to accomplish some of the content management that exists in the deep linking spec. For example, you may want to be able to push items from your tools user interface when you didn't start from the platform. You just were like, hey, push these 3 links over to my course over there. You may want to have an interface where what items are already in the course, so that you don't, prompt the user to add things that are already in there. You may need to edit things. There's with the next bullet point, course copy improvements, I'll talk about too for a second, but there's some overlap with course copying, being able to discover what links exist in a course that maybe you're seeing for the first time, but was just a copy of stuff. So there's a lot of interesting potential problems that can be solved with the deep linking service. And this is actively being worked on. So if this is something that interests you, this is active work that's moving right now. And there's a lot of interesting problems this can solve and new workflows it can create as well. There's a lot of work going around course copy improvement. Tools in particular know the pains involved with course copy at all levels. It's different in every LMS. It's within an LMS, it can be different at times. There's a lot of best practice work that needs to be done here to explain how to do some of this stuff. But there's also specification work like the deep linking service and others that will help communicate, potential services, hey, a course copy happened, here's new information. There's a lot of new potential ways to kind of solve some of these problems generically. It's a hard problem because it's so different in all these different platforms, but it's a very big pain point for many people. And so that's important work that's happening right now as well. And then this is at a technical level, a pretty small one, but I think at a practical level, very big. Due dates and unlock dates. There's so many complaints and problems with people dealing with these when you're trying to balance that between a platform and a tool. Some platforms have variable substitutions that will let you get at these dates. Some send them automatically. Some have different ones. The LTI spec defines a couple variable substitutions, but it's inconsistent and unclear how they work. And so the work that's happening is trying to look at this, take a little bit of a step back and say, hey, how do these dates work? Where do they need to be communicated? In deep linking, in assignments and grades, in common cartridge. We have talked about that, but that's part of it. And so we're just trying to solidify around, I think in the end, probably just 3 to 5 data points, what their semantics are and how they can be communicated and requested between systems. And I think that's really going to help a lot with some of the best practices around handling dates on LTI links, items like that. It seems like it should be a simple problem, but it's always more annoying than you want it to be. But in the end, I think it'll be pretty simple solution integration wise, sending dates and requesting them with specific meanings. And so I think a lot of people are excited to finally get this nailed down, since it's been annoying for a very long time. I think that's it for content management. Any questions about any of these ones or comments? All right. So that's the overview. So this is, again, the slide. This shows all the items I just talked about and their categories, minus the group service. Well, let me fix that. There we go. So this is the scope of the work that's happening right now in the work group. Some are big, some are small, some are moving quick, some are moving slow. But we're trying to, improve these various areas. And, different groups care more about, gradebook management than content management and stuff like that. So they all kind of move at different speeds. Just wanted to give a high level overview and context around this work. That's it. Any questions about any of these, or the categories, or just kind of how the work is works in general? I wasn't watching chat either, so it looks like that's covered. But any other questions about these new specs as a whole? Is there anywhere we can go to follow the goings on with content management? I don't know. that's kind of the purpose between this presentation, is to start keeping people up to date with everything that's happening. We've never broken them down into categories like this before, and haven't purposely communicated the progress outside the work group. So I think we don't, other than following the meeting notes in the forums, which probably isn't too fun, Donna, I don't think we've got great consistently used mechanisms for communicating progress on all of these at this time, but maybe Mark or someone else has a better answer than that. That's definitely something I think we need to solve, emphasizing the community aspect, right, and making sure we get feedback enough from everyone. But anyone else have thoughts on that one?
It's just worth mentioning that for contributing members, if they do have access to GitHub, I can see that you've got the tab open already, showing the project board that we have with all the tasks that we're working on in the working group. So that has tickets that, if you have access to that, that's kind of the bleeding edge in a sense of what you can follow.
Yeah, contributing members should be able to see this, and this is what, when we're on our work group calls, we're actually going through this. I would imagine most people wouldn't want to follow at that level of detail, so we need to find ways when we're making progress to communicate that better. And I think this roundtable, you know, maybe smaller versions of what I just did at the beginning of roundtables, for example, might be a great thing, you know, just like a quick 5-minute version of this, like, hey, here's the progress we've made in these different areas, or that makes sense. Something like that might be nice.
Yeah, I think for other members and not at the contributing member level that might not have access to that, if you're involved in other groups, we do have ways to submit user stories or use cases, and any of the IMS staff would be able to point you to that. I think it's a Google form that we have. And I don't have a link handy for that for you, but if that's of interest, there are, and also the Google form that we use for submitting questions for these roundtable meetings, you could also, you know, just pass along information that way. We would have your email address. You know, if there are details you want to share outside of these roundtable meetings, and these meetings themselves are a good way to collect that kind of feedback too.
All right, so we're happy to go back and cover any of these things that are happening here. That's the end of that presentation, and so the end of this, we're planning to just have open Q&A like we often do here. And so if we've got any questions in the LTI realm, we're happy to discuss them. We have a lot of work group members here, and we can go to the end of the hour, or if, you know, we don't have any, we're happy to end a bit early too and let you all go. So any kind of questions and answers, feel free to just speak up and ask. Were there any comments in the chat that didn't get answered? I wasn't watching close enough while I was talking.
No, I think everything's been covered.
Maybe I can break the ice a little bit and just see, you know, as we look at future meetings of this roundtable bi-monthly now, and we're just going to meet on the even months instead of every month. So hopefully that schedule has been made clear. That's just an adjustment we've made in the last month or two. So if there are specific topics, you know, we've done quite a lot of demos. We've offered many of the tools and platforms that are part of the LTI project group, or that have been early adopters, to show, you know, what the kind of their approach and philosophy to implementing LTI, and hopefully some of that has been useful. I think we've provided a few demos of early dynamic registration, for example, or other some of the other work that Bracken has described. So you kind of get a preview, an early look at what that's going to be like. So if there are requests for specific topics that we could show, product demos, those kinds of things, if you're interested in contributing ideas for future roundtable meetings, we are open to that. So put notes in the chat, or just speak up and raise your hand.
Lawrence, we do have your question, and it was kind of send around a specific platform's bug that we believe has been resolved, and we wanted to reach out to you individually about that because there's some unclarity there. But if that works for you, that's great. Good. Any other questions or new problems you all want to solve? Another question about deep linking. We need our tool to open in a new tab/window. Can we add a way to specify that? Ooh, that's great. I have noticed most LMSs, you can say, when you have a resource link in the modules area or lessons area, you can say open that in a new tab. I haven't seen that for deep linking configurations, and that could be something that is part of dynamic registration to specify that. But if one of the other workgroup members has a good way to think about that.
I think the question was more about
needs to open a new window. How would you communicate that to the platform?
Well, I think the question was more about the link you create. How do they open a new window?
Oh, I see.
And that is supported in the spec where you specify that you support the window format. So you can say iframe, window, or embed. You can define multiple supports, so in which case the platform could pick whatever they want, or you can just specify window, in which case the platform should understand that you only support a new window. But now the implementation, well, I think it's pretty well supported as far as I know. But
yeah, so Lawrence, when you say, what's the name of that property, Claude?
Window. So in the deep linking, in the content item you return, you can specify window, and just put window in there means it's a new window. Otherwise, you can put iframe, I think, or embed.
What's the attribute name where window is the value?
I think window is the attribute name.
Oh, the attribute name is window.
And then you can give it a value of, you can have a value of name for the target name. Something along those lines. But it's in the spec.
There is a specific mechanism for specifying that you want it in a new window or in the same one or embedded in the documentation. And I think most of the LMSs honor that for the LTI links you add.
Yeah, it's a bit different from LTI 1.1 deep linking. So this one is UJ. So there is a way.
Should I try to hop to that documentation and show it real quick?
If you have it handy.
Deep linking. Okay.
But it's true.
2.1.
Oh,
and then down a bit, there's window below embed, so you can.
I'll put this
specify
in the chat. There. Oh, it's already in there. Thanks, Carl.
Yeah.
So that's LMSs, I believe, all honor this that are capable of it right now.
Yeah, and but it's a good point to say that we only support that for resource links, and actually there has never been, for all those new kind of placements, we've never been like the submission review and the deep linking. They tend to open in iframe. Like there is no. At least we haven't specified, maybe the specification would allow you, maybe a platform would allow you to say, I want my deep linking to open in a new window or submission review to open a new window. But the default implicit flow is for those ones is to be more iframe driven because they're really meant to open in context of a UI flow. So.
Yeah, in Blackboard, you can specify when you create the deep linking placement, which unfortunately placement is a bad word in LTI. When you define the deep linking placement, you can say, do you want it to open in a new window or not? But we haven't standardized the concept of placements in LTI yet.
Yeah, that was my misinterpretation of the initial question is, can we specify when the deep linking launch itself should be in a new window? And that might be something we need to standardize if that becomes problematic, because right now that is not. But the actual links you return via deep linking can specify the window, just to summarize all.
Yeah. And then my goal is now, when you go back to this idea of defining this function for placement, then let's go to dynamic registration. When you do dynamic registration and you define your support for deep linking, that is a place where you, as a tool, you may express a preference for a new window, and come what may, if the platforms will honor it or not.
Perfect. Looks like David Lippman's question was answered by Eric. All right. Any other questions or problems? So in Canvas, notice some resource links and context IDs are getting confused or muddled. I don't know that we could answer that in this context, and that might be a Canvas specific problem. But if a resource link exists in multiple different courses, different contexts, the context ID on those launches should be different for each of those, and the resource link ID should probably also be different, though the resource link ID, I believe, is only meant to be scoped to its context.
You cannot have a resource link ID appear in multiple contexts. It must be unique across all
so
contexts.
If that's the case, that would be a bug there. And then there are known issues in Canvas where you can have generally the context level launches we were talking about, and some others that would have the same resource link ID within this context, even though they're different placements. And that's a Canvas specific problem to be dealt with, I guess, that they need to fix in certain contexts. But that's not the specification version of it. Yeah. We're happy to answer vendor specific questions often, depending on the scope of it and whether it's understandable by the whole, whether it makes sense in the generic version of it. But we do try to avoid the hammering on any one group, because all the different platforms and tools have plenty of problems with them in their implementations that need adjusting and fixing. And again, that emphasizes the community of practice I was trying to emphasize, is like, there's so many different interpretations and ways to do this, and the only way to move forward is as a community point those out and figure it out and make it work and improve it over time. And I think that's something the LTI community has been excellent at, and why we've succeeded so much over the last decade with LTI is just, yep, there's a problem, let's figure it out and move forward. And so I think that's great. All right, Mark, I think we're winding down unless someone wants to throw in a last question. So I'll read this out loud. I don't understand you though. Perhaps it's a misconception, but we in the QTI group ran into a blocker when trying to pass a collection of user context to a tool in an LTI launch. For example, when wanting to create a collection of users in a tool. Yeah, I don't know. That's not a specific use case that we've dealt with, but if you, if that's something you want to work on,
well, yeah.
There's
so
ways
this is
to
a
work with this with the group service and with the assignment grade service that might get at it.
This is something that has come up before, with the fact that LTI only supports one context. So in other specifications, you can have multiple contexts for a single resource, but we can only have one in LTI. It's a known limitation which we've kind of worked around at the moment. It's not come to the point where it's become a big enough issue for us to kind of put, I suppose, the resource into trying to work out a fix for it, because obviously changing that relationship at this point would be quite difficult. So yeah, it's potentially, if it is something that's causing issues, bring it up with the working group, and we'll discuss it, and we can kind of see exactly what the use cases are that people have, and how we might be able to try and resolve them. But yes, it is kind of
that area is a good example of where sometimes might be broader specification handling many contexts better, or it might be, yeah, for these use cases with the LMSs, here's the best workarounds that everyone can actually get behind right now, given the current infrastructure, and solve it via best practice. So sometimes we don't know exactly what the best route towards solving a problem will be. It's because it's trickier.
Well, so yeah, it's been brought up before. And I don't know. I mean, it just seems like, the fundamental thing you'd want to do is be able to pass a collection instead of just a singleton to a tool.
Yeah, the LTI has always been very single course context focused. These are integrations, and when a tool gets a launch, it's for a specific course, and a lot of the assumptions are kind of the other supporting services. They kind of assume single context for the scope of what this gradebook calls are allowed to get and stuff like that. And so there is some different default understandings of the scope of LTI things that don't overlap as much as with QTI and other things. So it does get a little trickier just based on a lot of the assumptions in LTI. I think I don't fully understand your scope of your problem either, so yeah.
But I think here it goes to the definition probably of a new message type and understanding the use case. What is the intent? Why do we need multiple things? And then go to the crafting of a new interaction point that supports that, because it would not be, this use case would not be triggered where we put LTI now. So it means it's a new place where there is a new need somewhere that we need to understand, probably define a support message for it. And this support message may take a batch, an array of target users, for example, like greater than one, right, or something like that. And then we just need to define that. And,
there's definitely room for those types of mechanics. Yep.
So there was a question about certification, asking which services are required for certification with LTI 1.3, and there's a separate certification for LTI Advantage. So I can answer that one if you want. Yes, you can certify for LTI 1.3 core on its own without LTI Advantage. LTI Advantage is a packaging of the LTI core specification and then the 3 extension specifications of deep linking, names and roles provisioning. Oh, there we go, got a slide for it. And assignments and grades. So those 4 specifications combined together, what constitutes as LTI Advantage. So if somebody is LTI Advantage certified, they're certified to work with those specifications. If they're just LTI 1.3 core, then that is just the core message launch for a resource link launch.
And the way, again, kind of how I presented it in this presentation today, that core is that base LTI infrastructure that you can build on top of with these other services, plus some of those other ones we mentioned. So those all just utilize the core. So you have to implement 1.3 and you can do just that, and then advantages everything together. So it's really the infrastructure, the ability to solve all the problems with the LTI stuff, and then specific services that solve specific categories. And that helps us communicate about, what the capabilities of a platform or tool are.
Yeah, it's really key here. I mean, this is telling you what the platform is capable of. As a tool, you don't need to use anything that you don't need to use. So, but just tell you that with LTI Advantage, this is what you can expect from a platform to be able to deliver to you as a tool. And then you use whatever you need to do.
And the definition of what advantage is may change. Next year, it may include, the dynamic registration. I think we all kind of hope it will, because that's an important piece. And so LTI Advantage 2.0, whatever that would be named, this is not something that's happening right now, but it might change what advantage is, but the core will stay the same. And so advantages, have we as a community want to communicate to each other as the base strong pieces. That I totally went off the rails there, but it might change over time.
Yeah, and I think the idea here is that we have the advantage now. We propose some new extensions, new work, and as those work gets adopted, then they suddenly make sense to be incorporated as being really becoming part of the expectation of a platform which would support us.
And that's a great, so Andrea mentioned the proctoring service, and that's a great example. So LTI Advantage is the core plus those 3 support services. And I don't think LTI Advantage would ever include the proctoring service, because that's a very specific niche service that solves a specific problem, whereas the grading and rostering and content ones are kind of seen as the baseline for quality integrations. And so you could still certify for LTI and LTI Advantage, And then if you're doing proctoring, that would just be seen as a separate service certification. And so I don't think there will always be services built on top of the LTI spec and infrastructure that aren't part of LTI Advantage, because they're just solving specific problems and not really meant to be solved as generic integration things. And so that's, the group service is probably another one that wouldn't be part of Advantage, but still something that maybe you'll be able to certify for eventually, or the activity item one, for example. But those are, you can tell the difference between those and dynamic registration, which would make sense to add there because it's a base infrastructure piece that improves things for all LTI integrations, not just specific use cases. And so that'll always be part of that marketing conveyance of all this information. Is there a place in the specification for passing a user's PNP? I don't know what PNP is.
Personal needs profile.
There is not right now. I mean, all the messages are very extensible, and you can put that information in, but there's not a standardized way to put that in right now. This has been coming up recently, and IMS at a level higher than LTI has been trying to figure out how to get accessibility information across multiple different standards and define that in a common way. That hasn't hit LTI yet, but this does come up semi-frequently. How do we convey that information? And it's the technical solution to it will be fairly simple. It'll be define what the properties are and where it goes. The configuration and privacy and security implications around that and passing that information between systems is another layer that adds complication in the LTI context that's slightly different from others. And so we talk about that a lot. I don't know exactly the state and where that's moving right now, but it's definitely a problem IMS in general is trying to solve. If two integration partners needed that information, they could also just define a way to do it right now and then help the work group understand the implications of how they did it. That's usually the pattern, is something like two people need to convey this information. They say, okay, we put it here in this way. And they say, hey, work group, we're doing this. Should we make this something that everybody does or can do? And so that's also a route. If you actually have a problem you need to solve, you can do it. And then, we can work together to, help everyone do that as well. So there's always patterns for that.
All right. I'm just going to paste a link here in the chat that takes you to the landing page, I guess, where you can find all of the Roundtable recordings, past sessions. I'm assuming, Bracken, you're going to make your slides available, so we can post those, as well as a link to the YouTube channel when these are, when this has all been uploaded. So thank you for your attendance today. The next meeting of this group, going to our pattern now of every other month, will be the 22nd of June. So wish you all well and healthy, happy days between now and then. And if you have any questions that come up, you can submit some questions to that Google form or any of the forums, etc. So
thanks everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.